I'd like you to picture the thing you love the most in the world. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a favorite sweater, your grandmother's china, your computer. It doesn't really matter. Just picture that object, and don't worry, I'm not going to take it away from you or break it. So just imagine that item. Really hold it in your mind's eye. You got it? Great. Now, would you give up a year of your life for that thing? It may not be that item itself, but the average person is going to lose an entire year of their life looking for misplaced items at home and at work. An entire year wasted. And for what? For stuff. Now, there's plenty that I could say about core values and aligning yourself with them and living this powerful, passionate life where everything is removed surgically. Any obstacles that come up are completely wiped out, and you're living this tremendous life of power and passion and focus. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about stuff and how stuff robs us of time and gets in our way over and over again. When I was 11 years old, my best friend Carrie Adler wanted my baseball card collection. Now, this baseball card collection was really awesome. I had managed to amass a tremendous collection of baseball cards for all kinds of birthdays, holidays, straight A's on my report card. Any opportunity I had to get a baseball card, a package of baseball cards, I took it. It was my preferred gift whenever anybody was going to be giving me something. So if you can imagine, this was quite an awesome collection of baseball cards, and Carrie wanted it. So in exchange for that, I insisted that Carrie sign a paper plate that promised he would be my best friend for life. Apparently, had I not become a professional organizer, I would have made a pretty good attorney. But anyway, he signed the paper plate. I gave him the baseball cards. As it turned out, a year later, my folks split up. We moved out of that neighborhood, and I wasn't going to see Carrie again for another 30 years, although I didn't know it at the time. So I kept that paper plate, and I moved it with me from home to home, from my mom's house to my dad's house. I kept it with me for years, even though what that paper plate came to represent was just a bunch of loss and pain. It represented the fact that stuff wasn't permanent, that people were unpredictable, and that stories weren't facts. And yet I kept the paper plate around me. And I thought that that was actually what was wrong with the world, was that stuff wasn't permanent, that people were unpredictable, and that stories weren't facts. And the day that I realized that, in fact, those were the keys to my freedom was the day that I let the paper plate go. So I realized that stuff isn't permanent, that people are unpredictable, and that, thank God, stories aren't facts. It became very clear that often the things that I came to believe were true turned out to not be true at all. In fact, they were 180 degrees wrong. But the story is what kept me tied into them. And I'm willing to bet that every one of you have at home your version of a paper plate and a broken promise that you're keeping around as well, even though all it represents to you is loss and pain and disappointment. Long after something has outlived its purpose or usefulness, perhaps it's even become a clear and distinct obstacle, we still hold on to it. Even after we've applied logic and reason to it, we still hold on to it. Why? Because of story. Every great educator, business leader, and strategist will tell you the same thing. What's the difference between good and great? Story. Story is how we connect with each other. Story is what binds us to each other. Story is how we experience intimacy. Story is the anchor that we build all of our relationships on. A great story will get people to do just about anything, vote against their self-interests, turn their backs on their neighbors, even commit murder if the story is convincing enough. We also love stories of the unlikely ways people meet and fall in love. My 82-year-old cousin got married 4 years ago to the love of her life. She hadn't seen him in 63 years. She'd already married and divorced or buried 2 husbands. She didn't even remember this fellow. She ran into him at a pizza parlor in West Bloomfield, Michigan. He told her that he hadn't stopped thinking of her every day for the last 63 years. 3 weeks later, they were married, and they've been together ever since. Story is our way in. So when we find a good story, It doesn't matter whether it ends poorly or not. We will tell it over and over again to anybody who's within earshot. Just picture any person you've ever heard talking too loudly on a cell phone. What are they talking about? A story. Typically a story where something was shocking or surprising or somehow appalling enough that they needed to pick up the phone and tell another person immediately. They couldn't wait another minute to share this story with somebody else. Clearly they couldn't wait because they had to annoy the rest of us with their story while we were busy trying to tell somebody our story. And if you scowl at the cell phone talker, it just gives them another story to tell later on to somebody else about the jerk that gave them the dirty look while they were simply telling so-and-so about this horrible thing that happened at the office and blah, blah, blah. If story is so essential and so vital when it comes to building relationships with people, why is it so deadly when it comes to letting go of stuff? Because we believe the stories we tell ourselves. Regardless of whether they are true or not, we believe them. The average person will lose 30 to 60 minutes a day looking for misplaced items. That's a fact. And over your lifetime, those 30 to 60 minutes will shave an entire year off your life. So you've got to ask yourself, how important is stuff really? In a vacuum, in your mind, you might be able to manage those 5 or 10 minutes and tell yourself, well, it's really not that big of a deal. You've probably wasted more time watching reality television. Or you could be telling yourself that, well, this is overblown. This is hyperbolic, and really it's not that big of a deal. Or you might be telling yourself that you're the exception. And you may very well be exceptional. You probably are because you're here this evening. But I want to tell you, when it comes to stuff, you aren't the exception. You are the rule. I want you to think about someone you love who's no longer here. And now imagine them getting another vital and vibrant year to be here. Not another year sick and suffering, but a year gardening, or baking pies, or curing cancer, or helping somebody with their homework. It's the insidious nature of story that backs us out of the here and now and tells us that someday or later actually exist. But what are those? They're just words. Have you ever been to someday? When has later ever actually become now? Once you believe that there is any time other than this present moment, this moment right here, right now, you've lost. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing now. And if it isn't, can you let go of the story that says it is worth doing just maybe later? Because when later becomes now, it's going to arrive with all of its own responsibilities and agenda items safely in tow. There is no magic time in the future with nothing to do. That time is called death. So how do you let go of a story that doesn't serve you any longer? You've got two choices. You can either tell yourself a new story, which is often what we do when we break up with people. We had that story that said they were going to love us forever, never leave us, always have dinner on the table when we got home at night, and never cheat on us. Remember that story? We replace it with the story that says, you were a creep from the get-go. You always chewed with your mouth open. What's with those friends, and what's with those shoes? That's the new story. We just cut and paste the new story right over the old story, and suddenly it becomes that much easier to say, you're not breaking up with me, I'm breaking up with you, loser. Or choice number 2 is we can just open our hands and let it fall. If one story is as good as any other story, if one story is as likely to be true as any other story, what would this object mean to me if it actually had no story? If you didn't know how it came to be in your life, if you didn't know how it got there or who gave it to you, what would you use to evaluate its significance and presence in your life today? Either it serves you or it doesn't. Is it practical? Is it pretty? Does it provide convenience or comfort? If it doesn't do any of those things and it has no story, why would you keep it around? With people, story is what connects us together. With stuff, story is what holds you hostage. For those things that serve you, that feed your spirit and make you feel good, you'll want to use that story. It's an excellent tool. It will empower you, it will embolden you, and it will strive you and drive you forward. Tell that story over and over again. But for the stuff that you're finished with, the things that no longer serve you, those things, whether they're benign distractions or full-out obstacles, the story becomes your prison. Holland Dozier Holland had it right in 1966 when they said, "Set me free, why don't you, babe? Get out my life, why don't you, babe? You don't really love me, you just keep me hanging on." And when stuff and story has us in their grip, when logic and common sense don't seem to have any effect at all, what is it that's going to loosen that grasp? And that is permission. Permission will. I was talking with this woman the other day. Here's some facts. She lives in Brooklyn. She is divorced. She's Jewish, and her ex-husband is a sculptor. For their wedding, he made this Kiddush cup. For those of you who don't know, Kiddush literally means sanctification, and it is a blessing that's said over wine or grape juice at special occasions, holidays, things like that, Jewish weddings. So anyway, he made this rather brutal Kiddush cup for their wedding. She hated it. She hated it the moment she saw it. She hated it at their wedding. She hated it for the 22 years that they were married and for the 5 years after their marriage that she lived with it. Now, when they split up, her ex-husband made it very clear to her that he didn't want the cup. Both of her sons have also told her they do not want the cup. She hates the cup, and yet the cup is still in her life. 27 years. She has a story that is so powerful about that cup that it has stayed in her life. Now, I met her, like I said, about a week ago to talk to her about some work. We started talking about my work, and naturally we got into stuff and story and some of the content that I cover. So now, it's a week later, we're meeting on the Upper West Side to discuss whether this work is going to happen or not. And the first thing she says to me is, "I have a story to tell you." And I think, of course, wow, great, a story. I can't wait. So this is what she says to me. She says, "I got off the phone with you." Well, first of all, she says, there's this cup. She tells me the whole story of the Kiddush cup. Her husband made it, she hated it, she lived with it for 27 years. She said, "When I got off the phone with you, I went downstairs, I put a note on the Kiddush cup, set it on the stoop that said free, and in an hour, that Kiddush cup was gone." She had had it for 27 years. After having this conversation, in 15 minutes it was gone. Now be clear, this had nothing to do with me. I was simply a catalyst. What was it that changed from before our conversation until after our conversation? She gave herself permission. That was the missing piece. It had nothing to do with me. I didn't give her permission. She found somewhere inside herself the permission to stop telling herself a particular story, a story in which she was a bad ex-wife, or she was an uncaring, selfish mom, or she was a bad Jew. Any one of those stories that she might have been telling herself, she realized that somewhere inside there was another story in which she was none of those things. She was just somebody who was done with something that she never really liked. And that gave her permission to take that cup, go downstairs, set it on the stoop with a sign, and give it away. So where's your paper plate? What's your Kiddush cup? What is keeping you a prisoner because of a story you're telling yourself? You want to live a life of passion and power? You want to live a life of efficiency and razor-sharp clarity? New stories? No stories? Permission. Those are the keys to liberation. Open your hands, let it go. See it without a story or a story with a happy ending. You have permission. Thank you.